Hello, Cracker here, and welcome to the part 2 of our tutorial. We're going to continue from where we stopped the last time. In the last class, we learned how to take a customized text into Photoshop, and we discussed why it was very important to make it a high resolution. In this part, we're going to be looking at how to edit our 3D object. Let's start by reducing a document size to a smaller document size. I want to use 851 by 315 pixels. I'm just going to fill this with black and then invert it by pressing Ctrl I. Okay. Now that is just a background layer. It's not really important. I just need a white background so you can draw a rectangle, to have a background to work with. Now I want you to take a look at this panel. Now this is the 3D panel. Now the 3D panel is just like the layers panel. The only difference is that this is where you have the 3D objects and its properties. So you can select the 3D shape here. You have the different mesh for the 3D object, featured in the 3D panel. Now, the 3D panel also has the camera and it also has the lights. So in a 3D scene, you have light, camera, and 3D objects. Now, to the right side of the 3D panel, we have the properties. For each 3D object that you select, or a light or a camera, you'll see its respective properties on the right hand side here. These layers do not necessarily have to be, these panels do not necessarily have to be in these positions. You can actually move them around. So when I say on the right, to the right of it, it doesn't always have to be that way. Okay. The first thing we're going to do is take a look at, we want to rotate the text that we have here. We want to rotate it 90 degrees. Now on the x-axis. Now we're going to use the 3D widget to rotate it. Now this is the 3D widget. You have the green widget. The green handle of the widget is for the y-axis. The red handle is for the x-axis, and the z-axis is the blue handle. Now, so we're going to rotate it along the x-axis. Sometimes it may be tricky to rotate using this widget, especially if you need a definite figure. For instance, we want it to rotate by 90 degrees. So instead of using the widget, we're going to use the property panel. Now on the property panel, we're going to go to the coordinates. So we click on the coordinates and then we're going to type in 90 in order to rotate our text. Okay, now we rotate our text. Now I want you to take a look at this. Notice that this is a secondary view. Now this view enables you to see the 3D object from another angle, from a different camera angle. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch these views. This button is the switch button, so I can switch between the two views. So I want to look at it from the top view. So I'm going to switch from the side, from the front view to the top view. So I'm going to do that now. Now the reason I'm doing that is because mostly we're going to be working from the top view. This document, the design we are doing, will feature the 3D text in from an aerial view. So we're using the top view to work. Now the first thing I'm going to do is to reduce the extrusion depth. And then once I do that, I'm going to just snap this to the ground by clicking on the 3D panel, the top right corner here, and choosing snap objects to ground. This is the 3D light. It is an infinite light. What I want to do is to, adjust the light angle of the light in order to give me the shadow. In order to give me the shadow in the direction that I want. Now, to the right hand side, you can see the properties of the light here. You can see the intensity of the light and the softness of the shadow. So we're going to use these sliders to adjust the properties accordingly to give us the result that we want. Now in the course of this tutorial, we're going to be adjusting the values, to give us the result. We're going to go back and forth, adjusting the values. Sometimes it's a bit tricky to get exactly what you want at first. So what we're going to do is to adjust the values. Now what I'm doing now is I'm increasing the extrusion using the widget. Now you don't necessarily have to use the widget, so you can use the property panel to increase the extrusion. Another thing you can do is to, once you select the 3D object, you tap V on your keyboard and it's going to bring out this widget, and this widget is going to, if you tap V the first time, it's going to bring out a widget. You tap it the second time, it's going to switch to a different widget. So now tap it till you see the taper widget. Now we're going to use the taper widget to add taper to our extrusion. Now what that does is, it changes the perspective of the extrusion material. You can rotate the view so that we can see very well, and also try as much as possible to make sure that your 3D object is on the ground plane by going to the right hand corner of this panel and choosing snap object to ground plane. Now, before making adjustments to the colors of the 3D objects, we want to do it against a background we most likely will be using. So in order to see how the color sits well with the background color, so we're choosing a deep yellow for this background. And then the next thing we're going to do is to start adjusting the light position. Now we want to get the shadow, the direction of the shadow, and also get a good illumination. So I'm just going to go ahead and make that adjustment. Now, I want you to know that before you select, the light, you have to select it on the panel here. So you have the infinite light here. So you click on it, the widget for the light would appear. Just choose it and move it around. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is to change the color of our extrusion material. Now, you're going to go to the 3D panel under Tracker Object, select the extrusion material, go to diffuse. Now we're going to remove the texture because we don't want that texture. So now choose the color that you want. I think the color is too dark, so we're going to leave it bright, make it a little bit brighter. Now the next thing we're going to do is to give it a bevel. So we'll go to the properties bar, and the third panel in the property bar, you have the option to change the size of the widget. So we're going to select from a list of presets the way we want our widget to be, the curve, of the widget. Now, for this text, we're going to use a widget size 2%. So we want the widget to be 2%. So go ahead and put 2% there. Now, this is the render button. Now, when working with a 3D object, momentarily you will have to be rendering to see how your result is, because the regular preview does not give you exactly what the work is going to look like. So you have to, from time to time, preview the render in order to have an idea of what the colors look like on the materials you're using. So what we're doing is we want to adjust the color of this extrusion. We want it to be something like a very light, maybe a light creamy color. So we're gonna keep adjusting that. Just follow along as I keep making that adjustment. Now, one tricky thing in 3D is the colors don't look exactly the same. When you choose a color, before previewing it, the color might look as if you've gotten it, but once you render, the color changes. So a lot of factors affect this. So the lighting affects the way the color looks. The specular, affects the way it looks. The diffuse. So you want to go in and make changes to those. But the most important thing you have to pay attention to is the diffuse, the specular, and the light. Those are the things that will most likely affect the appearance of your text or your 3D object. So what I'm doing here, I'm adjusting the light, and it seems that the shadows were too much, so I'm adjusting the light. So we're getting something, close to what we want. But we want a shadow in front. Now, the result that we have here is good, but we want a shadow in front. So for us to have a shadow in front, we need to put a light behind. So we're going to create a new point light. Now, this time we're not using an infinite light. We're using a point light because we want to place it downwards. We want to place it behind. Now, an infinite light is more like the light of the sun. You can't move it down. It always shines from up, down, But we want a light that we can move down to enable our 3D object cast a shadow forward. So we're going to use a point light. Now notice that in our secondary view, I'm going to change the view to, in order to see how close the light is to our object. So I'm gonna look for a view that will enable me to see the effect of the light on the other side. Okay, I think the left hand side works well. So now if you notice, as I'm moving the light, now the secondary views gives me an idea, of how close the light is, the positioning of the light behind the object. So we're going to make that adjustment. What enables this to cast a shadow is the light has to be way up, because a 3D object is tall, it's far from the ground plane. So you move it upward in order for it to cast the shadow, and then we're going to reduce the shadow softness to 35% in order to soften out the edges of the shadow. Alright, we're going to preview that. So we click on render and see how it looks. Now that's looking good, but the inner part of the word cracker is white and we don't want it to be so. So now, first of all, we've gotten a good angle, camera angle. So we're going to save that camera view. Now the reason we're doing this is we're going to be rotating our object and we want to quickly come back to the view. By saving it, we can always go into the camera setting and click that view, and then we are back to that view, so that we wouldn't have to spend time setting up, a perfect angle. So let's just go ahead and make further adjustment to the position of the light. As you can see, I have, rotate, because I have the scene, backwards. So I'm viewing from behind the text right now. And it gives me a fair idea of where to position the light. See, I'm going to go back to my view and it takes me right back. So that was the reason we had to save that camera view. So let's render and see what we have. Okay, the shadow looks good. We have the shadow that we want. We're going to go ahead and work on the extrusion material in order to knock off the whites here. Now, these whites here may be as a result of a lot of light, so what I did initially was to remove. Now, if you select Cracker and you go to the first item, the first panel on the properties, the 3D properties, you have the catch shadow and cast shadow. Now, the reason that place was white because catch shadow was turned off. That meant that even if light was shining on the object, the 3D object was not catching shadows. It was casting shadows, but its own shadows did not reflect, didn't fall on it because it was set not to accept shadows. So we're going to turn that on. All right, we're going to change this shadow softness a little bit and render to see how it looks. Now we can see that the shadow is so dark inside there. So we're going to turn the light, the infinite light, we want to turn it to face where you have the space in between, the holes in between the character. So now when we tilt the light to face the hole, it's going to help shine the light into those holes just to reduce how dark it appears that our 3D object is too bright. So we're going to reduce the intensity of the light a little bit. Our colors are coming together. We still have more adjustment to do. Alright, let's tilt that light upwards. Okay, as you can see, the light now shines into those hollows. So it's looking better. We want our extrusion material to be a bit brighter, so we're going to change that. The diffuse color, we're going to change it a little bit, make it a little bit brighter. Okay, that's looking better. Alright, this is how it looks after, rendering a little bit. So we're going to continue making adjustments. Okay, let's move this 3D panel, to the left side so that we can make enough room. Okay, now we want to edit our front inflation material. Now, what we're going to do is go to diffuse. If you notice, it already has a texture. As far as that texture is there, it's not going to allow us to change the color, to what we want it to be like. So let's select the front inflation. As you can see, it has the texture. So we're going to remove that texture, and then that will enable us to, set any color we want to it. And having removed that texture, it looks much better now. Our colors are showing through properly. I'm just gonna go ahead and reduce the bump for all the material. So I'm gonna select everything, reduce the bump. I'm gonna reduce the roughness to 0, and then see how it looks. Push back the reflections. We don't want any reflection. We keep the shine at 20, in order to enable light to disperse properly around the image. So as you can see, it's already beginning to take good shape. Now I want to adjust the background color a little bit, make the yellow a bit brighter, or make the yellow a bit darker. This is just a matter of preference. Okay, now we have the color of our 3D object the way we want. It looks good. Next thing we're going to do is to duplicate our layer, our background layer, and convert it to a 3D object. Now that is what we're going to use to create our liquid texture. As you can see, the 3D object is created, and what we're going to do is we're going to merge that 3D object. We're going to merge the two 3D objects together. Now make sure that the one you created, the one you just created, is at the top of the layer. Now that is going to enable it to inherit the atmospheric properties of the existing 3D object. So we're going to press Ctrl E to merge the 3D object into one 3D scene. Now, it is important that you merge your 3D objects. Now, why did we do this? If you have two 3D objects in your layers panel, now these two 3D objects are independent of each other. That means they are in two different worlds. If you create a light, the light from one layer doesn't affect the other. They are in two separate worlds, so they are completely independent. They can't interact. So for them to come into the same 3D space, you have to merge them. Now, so right now we want to change the size of this rectangle we just created, the 3D rectangle. Now, it's always easy if you try to make the adjustment directly like this. It can be tricky. So it's always easy to reset the coordinates of the 3D object. Now, once you set that coordinate, you'll be able to adjust the position and the size. We're going to go ahead and reduce the extrusion, and then we're going to scale it. Now, if you select, the square on the widget. Now, if you look at the 3D widget, you have three things at the tip. You have a square, you have an arc, and an arrow. Now, the square is to change the size of the 3D object in that direction. So you have the one on the x-axis is to change the size. Now, did I say square? What I meant was the cube. It's actually a cube. If you click on it and drag, it's going to change the size of the 3D object in the direction of that axis. So we're changing to the x-axis. We're going to change it the y-axis. So sometimes it may be difficult to select it, but just carefully, push it. Now, what I did was to, if you notice, if I render this, you're going to notice that there's going to be a reflection, on the ground. And what I did was, when I created the square, a 3D rectangle, I went ahead to increase the reflection properties of the front material. That is why you have this text reflecting off it. Now, that's looking okay. We're going to snap it to the ground plane, render it, and see how it looks. We want to make sure that our lighting, now this is really looking seriously blown out. So, but we're going to deal with that later. Now, the next thing we're going to do is to create a texture. Now, this is where we're going to create our water texture. Now, in order to create our water texture, we're going to go to the bump and then select new texture. So we're going to create a new bump map for our the bumpiness of the layer. The first thing we're going to do is go to noise. Now make sure your background and your foreground colors are set to black and white, and then go to add noise. Increase the noise to about 216, and then go to Gaussian blur. Now we're going to blur it about 0.5 pixels. Now the figure here, the value here is not as important as the appearance. So depending on your document size, your results might vary. So, but the most important thing is to make it look something like this. So whatever value you use, to give you something like this is okay. The next thing we're going to do is to go to the channels, and then we're going to select the red channel, and then we're going to go to Filter, Stylize Emboss, and we're going to use the angle of 180 degree, the height to 1, and the amount, push the amount all the way up to 446. Click OK. We're going to select the red channel, still go to Stylize Emboss. This time around, we're going to use 90 degree. Okay. Now, when we select the RGB, you see the shift in the channels, creates sort of an offset, so we're going to use this offset to create our bumps. Now, what we're going to do is you press Ctrl T to bring out the transformation handle, and then right click on it and select perspective. Click and hold at one end, the bottom part of the layer, and then drag, just like zoom out so that you'll be able to drag it properly. Zoom out, drag it, and we want this, you see, we want it to have this sort of a texture, as if it is kind of like a water texture. We're going to increase it again, now this time around I'm holding down Shift and Control and dragging that handle. And once that is done, we're going to close and save it, and that bump applies to the texture. Now, as you can see, it's already looking like a liquid texture, so let's render and see how it looks. Okay, great, that's looking good, but it's too bright, so we're going to work on the color. We're going to work on the intensity of this color. What we're going to do now is we're going to change the bump, reduce the bump to 5%. It was a bit too dramatic. And then the reflection, we're going to change it to 20%. Not 20, it's too, let's take it to 30. And then we'll render to see how it looks. Okay. It's not looking bad. Okay, let's go to our diffuse and then, bring down the color a little bit. Yeah, it's beginning to look creamy. Still needs some work though. Now, I want you to remember that we put two lights in this environment. Now, our point light, towards the back of the text is really shining on this liquid. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in and reduce the intensity. Okay, right now what we're going to do is I'm changing. Now if you select the camera and the camera properties, you're going to see two properties, perspective and orthographic. Now we're going to change the property to orthographic, and then we want to set a depth of field. It's just to add realism to our scene. I'm going to put the depth at 3.5 and then the distance at 0.35 should work. 0.35, 0.33 should work. That should bring the focus to our object. Now, one simple way of doing it is to hold down alternate and click on where you want the focus to be. And then let's render and see how it looks. All right, we still have that hot point, where you have the light. So we need to do something about that. It's just a matter of preference. Already we are set. We have created our liquid texture. So I'm just going to go ahead and make adjustment to that light, the opacity of the light, the intensity of the light. That's the right term. We do that, adjust the shadows, render to preview and see how it looks. We're just gonna compare before and after, and we have it. So we have created a liquid texture. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I wanted to do it this way in order to take you through the process. So subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and check out my other tutorials. More will be coming. Have a nice day.